Well, hello, everybody. This is Mike Levin, and welcome to our 95th Town Hall. I'm here virtually with you today, and I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. And you might wonder why that is. I am here and have been here for the last several days. Unfortunately, on Tuesday of this past week, I did test positive for COVID during a routine test. I've had mild symptoms since then, but I've been quarantined here in Washington. And I appreciate so much all those who have sent well wishes via text or email, or those who have called. Obviously, I very much miss my wife and our family, our kids, and I look forward to getting to spend time with them as soon as possible. But I am so fortunate to be fully boosted, and I recommend that everybody gets vaccinated and gets boosted as well. And so if you hear a sniffle or a cough, over the next 45 minutes or so, you will know why that is. But I'm feeling better every day. I'm very grateful for all the well wishes, and very grateful to be vaccinated and boosted. Let me also say that this coming week is a big week here in Washington, D.C. We have until this Friday, the 23rd, to fund the government. And I'm looking forward to, knock wood, the federal government passing an omnibus bill that will fund the government through the fiscal year, through the end of September of 2023. It's not quite a done deal, but just this past Friday, Congress did pass a 1-week continuing resolution. So we've still got some work to do. And obviously, there are a lot of things that I'm hoping will get in this omnibus package that we've been advocating for quite some time. And I thought it would be a good opportunity, since this is going to be our last visit with you this year, to highlight some of the amazing things that we've done in the 117th Congress. You know, these past 2 years, in some ways, have gone by very quickly. But I think as you look back, some of the historic legislation that we've passed, I think it really is worth taking a moment to just pause and just repeat all of this incredible work that we've done for the people as a part of the 117th Congress. Of course, the beginning was the American Rescue Plan. We were in the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic when we were sworn into the 117th Congress. And the historic American Rescue Plan got vaccines in arms, it got money in pockets, parents safely back to work, and children safely back in school. I can tell you, my wife and I, with an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old who were home for an entire school year, we were very eager to get them back into the classroom as soon as possible. And the American Rescue Plan, of course, helped schools and school districts all across the country, along with local governments, small businesses, and all the rest. And I believe that this law had such a great positive impact on our country, help us kickstart the fastest, strongest jobs recovery that we've seen in modern times. More than 10 million jobs in just 2 years. That's an astonishing number. Was it a perfect piece of legislation? Of course not. But did it do incredible good and accelerate economic recovery? Absolutely. Absolutely. Next was the bipartisan infrastructure law. I think we know that the prior administration had dubbed several different weeks as Infrastructure Week, but Infrastructure Week finally did come with the Biden administration working with House and Senate Democrats and Republicans to craft the biggest piece of infrastructure legislation since the Eisenhower administration. It really was guided by the president's campaign, by the president's vision to build a better America. And we are putting Americans back to work already, with many to be put back to work, rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our ports, our water systems, our broadband. And I am so proud already of the funds that have come and will continue to come to our district, to our region, as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I'm also very proud of the fact that this law put justice front and center and equity front and center, reconnecting communities that have been divided by projects of the past. And I'm particularly encouraged by the opportunity that we have to use the funds in the bipartisan infrastructure law to finally make long-term improvements to the rail corridor connecting San Diego and Los Angeles, which I have told everybody that I can, including the President of the United States, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, and everyone else, that our rail corridor is the second busiest in the United States, behind only the Northwest Corridor. The corridor, of course, that President Biden is very familiar with, having traveled on it as a senator to and from Delaware probably every day for the better part of 40 years. And so he's very familiar with rail, a big proponent of rail. And as I explained to him, Mr. President, you're familiar with the busiest corridor. We've got the second busiest. And there are parts of it that are literally falling in the Pacific Ocean by virtue of coastal erosion and our changing climate. And he has been incredibly supportive. We had the Transportation Secretary Buttigieg out to see the Lausanne corridor as well. And I'm excited and eager to work with my friends to finally get the investment that will be needed to secure and stabilize the corridor for the long term. And that'll include potentially relocating parts of the corridor, whether down in Del Mar or up in San Clemente. And I'm very grateful as well, excuse me, to my good friend Tony Atkins, who, as president pro tem of the state Senate, was able to secure $300 million for planning, engineering, and design for the San Diego portion of the Lausanne Rail Corridor. So much more coming in that regard. The third big bill that I want to mention is the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This was the most comprehensive piece of gun safety legislation passed by the Congress since 1994. And I think it was proof that activism, advocacy from grassroots organizations, including many in our district, really did work, really was effective. It really was landmark legislation. And of course, it took a horrible series of tragedies, including an unthinkable tragedy in Uvalde, Texas, where children were the victim of gun violence, for the Congress finally to act. So after many years, we finally did see a comprehensive bipartisan gun violence prevention bill make it across the finish line. Now, it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough. I think that we still must advocate for universal background checks. We must advocate for an assault weapons ban. And I'm committed to doing that, and frankly, working with anybody in my party or in the other party that's interested in common sense gun violence prevention measures. And I'm just going to keep at it as best as we can. Not that it will be easy with Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives, even with the small margin. But this bill, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, will deploy stronger tools to keep guns out of dangerous hands. It'll finally go a long way in closing what's known as the boyfriend loophole, and it'll invest in mental health services as well. So it's a big win. Next up, I want to talk for just a minute about the Honoring Our Pact Act. I've been so proud to serve as vice chair these last 2 years of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and also to chair one of the subcommittees. And the Honoring Our Pact Act is something we've been working on since I got to Congress 4 years ago. There are so many veterans who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but who've not gotten the necessary care or not gotten it from the VA as I believe is appropriate by virtue of having served and having been exposed to toxic substances, burn pits, during their service in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the Honoring Our Pact Act now will presume that the medical conditions, about 23 respiratory conditions, as well as some other conditions that veterans have, are directly a result of having been exposed to those burn pits. This was a huge deal. And in the midst of all the other legislation, I don't think it got quite the attention that it deserved. But roughly 3.5 million veterans are set to benefit from the Honoring Our Pact Act. And I'm just so proud that we were able to get it across the finish line. And it took a tremendous effort, including a lot of the local and national veteran service organizations, as well as some great advocates like John Stewart, who worked with the Congress and worked with the administration. And ultimately, we got that done on a broadly bipartisan vote. And I was very, very proud of that. Next is the CHIPS and Science Act. Again, this is one that you may not hear as much about. but nonetheless is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important for our district. When the President of the United States came to the district last month, we had him visit Viasat. Viasat is one of the largest employers in the district, based in Carlsbad, satellite communications company. And a direct result of the CHIPS and Science Act will be a domestic supply of microchips and semiconductors that will help local employers like Viasat. It will also provide workforce development training for campuses like Miracosta College. And of course, that Miracosta is where we had the president speak the prior evening at a rally. And so the CHIPS and Science Act will be hugely consequential for our district, helping to, again, develop that domestic supply chain. As it stands, about 90% of the microchips and semiconductors that we rely on, particularly the highest end ones, are coming from abroad. And if we want to be globally competitive, we need to rely on our own supply chain rather than on other countries when it comes to everything from our cars to our computers and to our defense systems. So I'm extremely proud we're making that investment in our domestic semiconductor and microchip supply chain. And then, of course, I think the one that has got a lot of attention, and deservedly so, is the Inflation Reduction Act. This legislation, which was known as Build Back Better for a time and came back as the Inflation Reduction Act, was absolutely a huge win on so many levels. But whether we talk about the fact that it reduces healthcare costs by extending the lower premiums for the Affordable Care Act, or whether we talk about the fact that Medicare will finally be able to negotiate prescription drug prices, or that out-of-pocket maximum amounts for prescription drugs under Medicare will be capped at $2,000, or the fact that this is the single biggest climate bill in the history of the United States, really the history of any nation. It is absolutely monumental when it comes to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. I think many of you know that's why I ran for Congress in the first place, with a background as an environmental attorney and a clean energy advocate. And finally, we were able to get this huge climate bill across the finish line. It would only have been possible, it was only possible because of the activism of so many people in our district and all around the country, including so many young people who demanded that Congress would act, demanded that this time would be different, and it was. Now, the $360 billion, $370 billion investment in the Inflation Reduction Act is set to reduce greenhouse gas emissions roughly 40% from 2005 levels by 2030. So it's a great first step, but again, 40% is not enough. We need to go further still. I like to tell my friends, and I know other colleagues of mine have made the same argument, that if we are reducing emissions by 40%, that means we have 60% still to go. And that's what we're going to try to do. Now, it's not going to be easy with the Republican majority in Congress, particularly with a lot of my colleagues across the aisle unwilling or unable to admit the basic evidence of the climate crisis and take a proactive role in wanting to address greenhouse gas emissions. But we've got to keep trying. I can tell you I was personally upset, disappointed, after having served on the Select Committee for Climate for the last 4 years, that the new Republican majority has announced that they will disband the Select Committee on Climate in the new Congress. And my argument to them was, you can call it whatever you want. If you don't want to call it Select Committee on Climate Crisis, don't. Call it something else. But don't disband the committee altogether. That's simply the wrong approach. So I was deeply disappointed, and I stand ready to work with anybody across the aisle who will work with me in a common sense way to address our greenhouse gas footprint. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, this is a lot. We just passed also the Respect for Marriage Act, I'll add, that finally will codify LGBTQ marriage equality and interracial marriage equality. This is something that's long overdue, and protects against the extreme Supreme Court and the inference in the Dobbs decision, which of course undermined Roe versus Wade, that the court might look at other matters relating to privacy rights, including the right to marry who you love, the right to same-sex marriage. And so I'm very proud of the fact that Congress, on at least a reasonably bipartisan basis, was able to pass the Respect for Marriage Act. And of course, a lot of activism went into that as well. So I couldn't be more proud of what we've been able to accomplish. I think it's been an incredible Congress, the 117th Congress. I'm deeply grateful to my colleagues for all of their hard work. And I am both excited and humbled to continue to serve in the 118th Congress. So with that, it's going to be a great new year, and I'm going to turn to some questions. I'll start with Pam and Doug Carey, who asked, Dear Congressmember Levin, we read on your website that you wrote to the California Public Utilities Commission urging them not to undermine Inflation Reduction Act incentives by imposing punitive rooftop solar and battery fees. Have you had any success in this regard? We were considering adding solar to our home, and it appears that this may not be the best time. Well, a few things, Pam and Doug. Let me first say that it's still a great time to add solar to your roof, even though the California Public Utilities Commission did come down with a new decision this past week that perhaps extended the payback period a bit, but it's still a great decision to put solar on your roof. What they've done is there's been a policy in California for some time, net metering, that effectively allows you to get paid for the surplus electricity that you're providing for the grid, surplus being what you provide to the grid in excess of what you use. Those net metering rules are being changed. You'll still be paid for the excess electricity you're generating, but you'll only receive a really good payment if you're producing that electricity and it's hitting the grid at the right time. So it'll incentivize a lot more solar plus battery storage systems and less pure solar electric systems. But the good news is that the federal government now has put in place with the Inflation Reduction Act 10 years of a 30% federal tax credit. That tax credit was set to go down. It went down from 30 to 26, and it was set to go down to 22, and then eventually taper off altogether. So in that sense, it's actually a better time to put solar on your roof. You get a slightly better tax incentive than you would have previously. But what I would recommend is reach out to get a few bids and see what the payback period would be. But I always think it's a good time to put solar on your roof or battery storage system in your home or in your business. And we also now have a standalone tax credit for battery storage as well. That wasn't there previously and is there by virtue of the Inflation Reduction Act. The last thing that I would say about this is that we did get involved. I did write a number of letters to the Public Utilities Commission on this net metering issue. And the final decision, the final outcome was actually quite a bit better than the preliminary decision that had been announced previously, which would have been even more draconian, even worse for those looking to put solar on their roof. And at the end of the day, I think there's plenty of money for the utilities to still make with a thriving rooftop solar industry. And sometimes there's a false choice that the utilities seem to want to create between their profitability and a new distributed grid. So still a lot more to do in that regard. But the other thing I should mention is if you've installed the system previously, your current net metering tariff will be grandfathered in. So I know that's a question for a lot of people as well. Jeffrey Johnson from Laguna Niguel. Hello, Jeffrey. He says, congratulations on your reelection. Will the House and Senate be able to produce legislation to solve the upcoming debt ceiling issues so that Kevin McCarthy cannot use as an excuse to hold us hostage for some crazy idea MTG or Matt Gaetz might have? Well, Jeffrey, that's a great question. I went on the floor of the House recently and I implored my colleagues across the aisle and anybody listening, do not use the debt ceiling as a mechanism to hold the social safety net hostage, to try to reduce benefits benefits or increase the retirement age for Social Security to try to reduce benefits for Medicare or gut Medicaid. I'm very concerned about this, and I'm disappointed, frankly, that we haven't been able to come to a deal on the debt ceiling. The reality is we cannot cannot compromise the full faith and credit of the United States. We must ensure that our word as the United States is our bond. I think the negative economic repercussion of allowing the debt ceiling to lapse would be horrifying, according to all the economic forecasting that I've seen. So I cannot stand that anyone would want to play politics with this, particularly to try to gut earned benefits like Social Security or Medicare. I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent that from happening. But I hope that the American people are paying really close attention to this, because at the end of the day, your voice needs to be heard. You need to stand up and make sure that your elected representatives know that they should not be advocating for cuts to Social Security, to Medicare, to Medicaid, or anything else that will harm retirement security. And I'm going to do everything I can to stand for Social Security, stand for Medicare and Medicaid, do what we can on the debt ceiling. And there are a lot of proposals in that regard. Some of them advocate having the debt ceiling be under the jurisdiction of the president with the consent of 2/3 of the House and Senate. I think that's an interesting idea. Others have discussed waiving the debt ceiling altogether. I think that's a less attractive option. But nonetheless, we've got to do something. The status quo is unacceptable. And in the near term, we need a deal that will at least extend the debt ceiling for the foreseeable future. Next question. Jennifer in Del Mar asks, why did the Equality Act have a highly partisan vote compared with the Respect for Marriage Act, which had some Republican support? Jennifer, that's an excellent question. My recollection is that the Equality Act, I think, had around 8 Republicans on board, and the Respect for Marriage Act, 8 in the House, that is, and the Respect for Marriage Act had about 40 Republicans on board. And that's a great number. I wish it were a lot higher than that. But the Equality Act has quite a bit different legislative intent than the Respect for Marriage Act. The Equality Act is intended to prohibit discrimination of all types on the basis of sexual orientation. And so it would apply to more broad circumstances: employment, housing, public accommodations, education, federally funded programs, credit, and jury service. And for whatever reason, Republicans, by and large, are against prohibiting that kind of discrimination. But the Respect for Marriage Act is actually quite basic. It's just the basic idea that every state must recognize same-sex marriage, that are a same-sex marriage or an interracial marriage that is performed in a state that allows it. So I think there's something like 35 states in the union that still have some sort of prohibition against same-sex marriage of some type. But nonetheless, they will now need to recognize, say, same-sex couples married in California. All the other states will need to recognize that marriage. So I think that was a lot more palatable, shall we say, for a lot of my friends across the aisle. But even 40 is not that great of a number. And I think we can do a whole lot better than that. John in Carlsbad asks, and this is a question that's been on a lot of people's minds: is there a chance that Kevin McCarthy does not get to 218 votes and won't become Speaker of the House? Would you prefer the likely alternative? Well, John, I don't think we know who the likely alternative would be. I think Andy Biggs of Arizona has announced that he's running. Biggs is far-right member of the Freedom Caucus. But I'll be watching to see how many of my Republican friends vote present, because if they vote present, that'll reduce the threshold that McCarthy needs below 218. In fact, I think he only needs 217, I believe, because we tragically we lost my friend Don McKeechin from Virginia. Um, he passed away recently, and his seat is open. So I think that the threshold currently is 217. But if you had a number of Republicans vote present, that would reduce the threshold further. And if I were Kevin McCarthy, I'm sure he's experienced whip. I'm sure he's going back to his days as whip, and he's counting every single vote to try to get over that threshold. But I think they're going to, we're going to see what happens in real time. I don't think there's much of a plan B other than, perhaps having however many votes are necessary in order to get him across that threshold. Diana from Vista asks, what is your reaction to Kyrsten Sinema leaving the Democratic Party? Well, I think it's a political decision that she's making, because I know that her approval numbers among Democrats are very low in the state of Arizona, and I know she's up for election in 2024. But look, I think that even running as an independent, her reelection prospects are pretty tough. Now, I will give Kyrsten Sinema credit on a number of things that she has done. In the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, she was able to come through and help with about $4 billion for drought for the Western U.S. I thought that was very necessary and was very encouraged to see that. But I've been very disappointed by other things that she's done. We had an opportunity in the Inflation Reduction Act to finally end the carried interest loophole for hedge funds. And she blocked that, putting the interests of evidently of corporate donors over the vast majority of the American people that have wanted to see the carried interest loophole ended for some time. Senator Sinema seemingly gets as much from corporate PACs and corporate America as any member. I'm proud to be one of about 50 members of Congress that gets nothing from corporate PACs, that refuses their money and refuses to be influenced. I think it makes me better at my job, frankly. But my hope is that the change in her registration doesn't ultimately change our 51-49 majority in the Senate, that she'll continue to vote with Democrats, even if she doesn't, show up for the lunches every week. And I believe her voting record with Democrats is around 90% of the time. And that's my hope. We'll just have to see how it plays out. It's quite interesting. My wife is an Arizonan. Her family is in Arizona, so I'm watching quite closely what's going on. Michelle in Oceanside asks, is there an issue you wish to see the Biden administration press harder in the second half of the term? Well, I think there are a lot of issues I think we need to address. I think it's hard to fault the Biden administration at a time when my colleagues in the House on the Republican side don't want to come to the table and negotiate. Great example, I would say, in this past few days has been on immigration. The Biden administration wanted to see a comprehensive immigration reform bill. They want to see a solution for Dreamers. They want to see a solution for farm workers. House Democrats have passed legislation for Dreamers and for farm workers. We passed the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. We passed the Dream and Promise Act. We'd love to see common sense reforms made to our broken immigration system. And there are some Republicans that would like to see that too. The unfortunate reality, though, is far more of the Republicans would rather run on the issue of immigration, point the fingers at the Biden administration rather than working with us to get anything done. And so I think the Biden administration is getting a lot of criticism for perceived inaction on immigration, but you've got to have a willing partner in House and Senate Republicans. We were talking about Kyrsten Sinema a minute ago. I was deeply disappointed to see that the deal being worked on by Sinema and North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis on Dreamers seems to be dead. I know Michael Bennet is working on a deal for farm workers, which I hope gets an omnibus. But, you've got to have a willing dance partner. It takes two to tango. And the unfortunate reality is too many on the other side would rather have the issue of immigration. Now, that's just one thing. I'm hoping we can do a lot more for our veterans. I'm hoping we can do a lot more to expand clean energy. Ultimately, we can only do these things if we're willing to work together. And my Republican friends, they need to make a decision whether they want to just investigate or whether they want to legislate. And I want to work with any of them that want to work with me to actually make positive change and get legislation across the aisle in a bipartisan way. It's not to say that the oversight function of Congress is unimportant. It's extremely important, but that can't be the only purpose that the new House Republican majority has. I hope they'll work with us on the legislative purpose as well. Next question is from Tom in San Clemente. Tom asks, what is your response to your Republican colleagues in Congress who voted against the Respect for Marriage Act to protect religious freedom? Well, I think my Republican colleagues that voted against that bill are living in the past. I think that religious freedom arguments, as well-intentioned as they may be by some in the faith community, by and large have been used as an excuse by my friends across the aisle. The bill actually does include protections for religious freedom. Got strong support. I know that Senator Romney and others negotiated a compromise in this regard. And the bill states that churches, mosques, synagogues, and other houses of worship that have a ideological issue with performing same-sex marriages do not have to perform those marriages if those marriages would go against their beliefs. The same is true for nonprofits that are formed for religious purposes. So we actually did come to a bipartisan agreement with regard to religious exemptions for organizations. And I just think it's been used as an excuse by those that continue to vote against the bill. Pat in Encinitas asks, is there climate change related progress made by the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis that Republicans will support, given that they now control the House of Representatives? Pat, that is an outstanding question, something I think about all the time. The problem that I see is that when I've been in the Select Committee meetings, too many of the arguments from my friends across the aisle seem to be literally word for word the arguments of the big oil companies. And as long as my friends across the aisle are only interested in doing the bidding of big oil, I don't think we're going to see meaningful reform in the 118th Congress, in this new Congress. I think if you just look at the state of campaign finance in the country, you see the millions and millions of dollars that were spent in dark money ads against us this past election. And they were largely funded by big oil. You might have remembered the ads said Congressional Leadership Fund across the bottom. You dig into who funds the Congressional Leadership Fund, and you'll see it's the American Petroleum Institute, Koch Industries, Chevron, Exxon, Valero, and some hedge funds and private equity executives. So they don't like my stance against big oil. They don't like that I'm actually advocating for consumers against the price gouging that people are feeling at the pump. And they, certainly wanted to defeat us. They were unsuccessful. But I bring all that up because the campaign finance issues, I think that's where a lot of my friends across the aisle got off track with regard to climate. You go back to 2008, the 2008 election between Barack Obama and John McCain was embracing climate action. Go back further than that, the Environmental Protection Agency, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, National Environmental Policy Act, they all had strong bipartisan support. The difference was, I believe, that the campaign finance system after the Citizens United decision has fundamentally shifted, making it far more lucrative for big oil to invest, shall we say, in politicians of their liking. And that's made Republicans a lot less likely to work with us on climate action. Now, I do think there are certain things we'll work on. I do think there is some sort of permitting reform that will need to occur to accelerate the development of renewable electricity projects. I don't support Joe Manchin's permitting deal, but I do think that something needs to happen to make sure that the grid of the future catches up as we're building all the solar and offshore wind and emerging technologies, and also with the dramatic increase in electric vehicles. We are going to need to modernize the grid, and we're going to need to have bipartisan work on that. Kathy in Solana Beach, she asks, Democratic leadership in the House now has shifted to a younger generation. How do you see this affecting policy and progress the party can make? Well, let me say first, Kathy, that it has been an honor and a privilege to get to serve with Nancy Pelosi, first as Democratic leader, then as Speaker of the House. She was just remarkable as Speaker these last 4 years. When she was campaigning for us as leader, she did an incredible job, and I have no doubt that she'll go down as one of, if not the most effective speakers of the House in American history. I was so proud to see her portrait unveiled last week in the Capitol, and was really sorry I couldn't be there personally because of COVID, but I look forward to checking that portrait out in Statuary Hall. Just the same, what an honor to serve with Leader Steny Hoyer, truly a statesman, a gentleman, just a wonderful member, and also Jim Clyburn is our whip. I'm eager to serve with them all because they're not leaving. They're, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Hoyer are leaving the leadership, but staying in Congress, and Mr. Clyburn is remaining as the assistant leader in the new Congress. And I'm just thrilled and excited to work with Hakeem Jeffries, to work with Catherine Clark, and my friend Pete Aguilar. All three are just great members. They represent the best of the Democratic Party, the best of House Democrats. They're going to do an amazing job. The same goes for my friend Joe Neguse, who's head of the DPCC, the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. And of course, my dear friend Ted Lieu, who'll be the vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus, an amazing group. And I'm just so proud to be a part of this next generation, getting to serve with my peers, my friends, my colleagues, and I can't wait for all the great things in future years that we're all going to do together. Rachel in San Juan Capistrano asked, what is your most important priority specific for California's 49th district during your third term? Well, I have several top priorities for our third term. We're going to keep working on getting the nuclear waste away from San Onofre as quickly and as safely as we can. As if you've been listening to me, you know that requires a whole national strategy around spent nuclear fuel. We're going to continue to improve the lives of our veterans on a bipartisan basis. I look forward to continuing my work there. And we're going to deliver a whole lot more federal investments, infrastructure investments, community projects for all of our local priorities. I'm not going to stop fighting for our rail corridor, for getting more sand on our beaches, and all the other great projects that we've got in the queue for our cities, for our districts, for law enforcement, and the rest. And that's a great honor to get to see the actual community impact of those funds. So there's a ton to do, and we're not going to skip a beat. We're going to get started, and I can't wait. It's going to be, I think, a wonderful 118th Congress. David and Dana Point, do you believe that Republicans will have the votes to eliminate the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis? What do you wish to say to your colleagues who want to remove it? Well, they do have the votes, and they have made that decision. And unfortunately, that's what is going to happen. And look, I'll tell our audience here what I said to my Republican colleagues in the committee. You can see the video of it from the other day. They are choosing a politically expedient option rather than what the science demands, and rather than what ultimately will be best for future generations. I ran for Congress in large part with two kids of my own, 8 and 10, thinking about their lifetime, thinking about their kids, their grandkids, all of our kids and grandkids, and the type of planet that they're going to inherit, type of environment, the air quality, water quality that they're going to inherit. I want a livable future, particularly for residents of a coastal community such as ours. And I just think that my Republican friends, again, they could have called it whatever they wanted. If they didn't want to call it climate crisis, I get it, even though that's an accurate description based on all available scientific evidence that there is, in fact, a climate crisis. But that notwithstanding, that they would eliminate the committee altogether, I think just sends a signal that they're not interested in the science. They're not interested in working with us in a productive manner. And that doesn't mean we'll give up, but it sure is an unfortunate reality. So I'm going to leave it there. I want to just thank everybody for their excellent questions. I want to thank our whole team. You cannot win a great election, as we just did, without an amazing campaign team. I want to thank our tremendous consultant and chief strategist, Park Skelton, our campaign manager, Adam Berkowitz. It was their birthday, by the way, this past week. So happy birthday, belated birthday to both of them. And our whole team, Francine Busby, Ellen Montanari, Bissio Healy, who helps with these town halls, and the whole field staff, Brad Zeminski, and the whole team. Grateful to all of you. Hope everybody gets a lot of rest this holiday season. I hope everybody stays healthy, stays safe, and try to stay away from COVID. Fortunately, after 2 years of good COVID luck, I had some bad COVID luck this past week, but I'm doing much better each and every day. I want to thank my amazing family, my wife, Chrissy, my parents, without whom without my wife and parents, none of this would be possible. My in-laws, love you all very much. And I hope everybody has a very safe and happy and healthy holiday season, whatever you celebrate. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas. Thank you all for everything, and we'll see you after the new year. Take care, everybody.